So let's start with some background. How did you end up working in tech or AI?
Tech was earlier. I started, really young, and I got really into Linux when I was 14 or so. And it was right around the time when the web was like a new thing and you had to work to kind of get on the web. And then Linux I just sort of found it. It popped into my life, and I really I read the GPL really early at 15, and it struck me. And the idea of helping in the open and making it freely available so other people could learn from things like I was learning from things seemed great. So I went and spent many years just working on open source stuff. And I don't know, I guess I didn't realize there was legacy technology, right? Like Windows was popular at that time. So people ran their, data centers on Windows, their networks on Windows. And this Linux thing was like very strange and people didn't really know what it was. Spent many hours compiling kernels and hacking on stuff. And
And what was the thought process behind starting like Hackpad?
Oh, Hackpad. So I had just finished like 4 or 5 years at VMware, and I wanted to get into startups. I knew that. And then, so I left VMware and I started working on an education startup like many of us do. I don't know if you know this, but like many, many founders start with like the idea of an education startup.
Like a rite of passage. Yeah.
It's like a rite of passage. Yeah. So I spent, 9 months working on that.
Most of us have done either that or consumer social. That's not
Sure. Yeah. And it's turns out education is very hard. You nod your heads knowingly. Yeah. And so after 9 months, I was like, all right, this isn't going anywhere. I don't know if there's a value prop here. I mean, that was the value, is that I learned that like you have to make something that is both achievable and that people want to pay for or spend their time on. So then I was just kind of fishing around. I was living in like a warehouse in San Francisco with a bunch of Burning Man people, and we were having trouble organizing large-scale Burning Man projects. And so I forked Etherpad and started hacking on it. Recruited a friend in the community to start working on it with me, and just grew from there. We had, before we did YC, we had many of the large Burning Man camps using it to organize their builds.
Can you describe the product experience?
Oh yeah, it was a real-time text editor, kind of like Google Docs. Google Docs is the only other one that did that at that time, and it was kind of nice because it would highlight who said what, so you could go track down if somebody had a contribution, be like, oh, what did you mean? Or I heard you say something about this. So that's very useful in like large-scale anonymous, pseudo-anonymous groups where you don't really know who has ownership over what, like Burning Man camps. And let's see. And then we did YC, and then we got many of those people did it. My hack was to go do YC and try and get all the companies doing YC to use my product, which many of them did. I also took like very extensive notes of all the YC presentations using the product that everyone would then like look at. And we were able to get Stripe, and Stripe used us for many years, actually. They built I think we were their first knowledge base. They used it for a long time. A bunch of other big companies as well. We're very lucky. Yeah.
And post Dropbox acquisition, you worked on what became Paper. How did you think about like what you wanted to go work on next?
After Paper? I kind of did, I spent the next few years kind of poking around at stuff. I knew that I wanted to make a robot that does stuff for you. Yeah, so there's this company called Magic. So I worked at this company called Magic. They were doing this like text-based personal assistants.
Mm-hmm. You remember this one?
I think just like everybody starts an education startup, Magic is one of those names that's cycling, and there's a really cool AI company right now called Magic as well. Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's also these names that kind of persist from generation to generation, which I think is really cool.
I'm sure you know it's CodeGen.
Yeah. No, yeah. I haven't seen a demo yet, but it sounds like they're doing the right thing. There's a few people doing that kind of whole repository changes. So it seems like a great direction.
What's like one learning from, Magic was like a company early in trying to do sequence models, machine learning in general.
No, it wasn't trying to do machine learning. It was all ops based. It was super heavy ops based. So They had teams of people, and it was 24 hours, and they would cycle in, and they would lose context, and like they were all busy because they're trying to like deal with lots of people with lots of requests all the time. And so really it was like a crash course in like human behavior, right? Like, what do people do under stress? How do they act? What do they say? What can you train? What can't you train? Like, can you bucket stuff? And the answer is no. Like, humans are complicated, especially in text form. So the beauty of the web and like traditional UIs, right, is that you fill them in. And like, if it doesn't do what you want, then you make the decision to either go forward or not go forward, right? Text has this annoying property of you can be all the way at the 99% mark and then change the goal entirely, right? And so it's complicated. It's hard to understand what people want. It's hard to understand the complexity involved, especially when you're dealing with the real world. Flights get delayed. Passwords get lost.
Do you think we're the last generation to deal with that? In other words, it feels like we're about to hit a transition point in which agents can actually start doing some of these things for us for real. When before, I think all these products really started with these operations-heavy approaches. I remember, there was a really early sort of personalized search engine called Aardvark, where similarly, if you kind of look behind the hood, it was a lot of ops people and there was a little bit of algorithm, right?
That was where they would like, you would like sort of describe what you're good at or something, and then they would try and send questions to you.
Yeah, exactly. They kind of route things, but I think there's actually people doing some of the routing at least, or I can't exactly remember, right? But I think it was, I think a lot of people wanted to build these really complex sort of bots or agents that were doing really rich things, and the technology just wasn't there, it feels like, for a period of time. There was also some startups. I remember one company that I got involved with that was trying to do like virtual scheduling and assistance, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And again, it felt like it was a little bit early. Maybe.
What were they called? Xdot? No, I was
no. There was a couple of them.
Clara Labs was
Clara, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember this era, and then we had Operator. Do you remember Operator?
Yeah, I remember Operator.
Yeah.
There's like 3 or 4.
And then like on the question answering stuff, we had Jelly. So there's a whole series of this.
Yeah, it's like so. Yeah, what we were able to do with Magic, as an aside there, I started working there because I wanted to work on the AI part. I think somewhere in there, Facebook M started as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a fun place to try and learn everything I could about solving those problems. Before Transformers, there was sequence to sequence was kind of the previous iteration. And we were able to take all the histories of the chats between assistants and people and train a little model on it, and a little by today's metrics. And run it, and it would show some gray text in the little text bar, and people could edit it and hit enter. And
like the operators.
The operators, and we would measure how much time they spent typing with it and without it, and so it would save like half an hour across 100 people per day, across an 8-hour shift. That was like my first shipping AI product, I guess.
And then how'd you end up going to Microsoft?
There was a bunch of other stuff along the way. There was so after that I did I got into crypto. My friend was doing HCAPTCHA, which was sort of a CAPTCHA marketplace, which is now like something like the number 1 or number 2 CAPTCHA service in the world, which is crazy. Yeah, so kind of launched that. That was fun. Annoyed people the world over for many, many man hours in aggregate, and then worked on left that to work with Moxie on a cryptocurrency for Signal. So that was really fun, complicated, and it all worked in a few seconds. We were shooting for Venmo quality, which I think pretty much it. So.
When you think about crypto in the context of AI, because people talk about it in a few different contexts, right? One is you have programmatic sort of money as code running, and so that could create all sorts of really interesting things from an agent-driven perspective. But then the other piece of it is identity. And some people think, WorldCoin would be one example, but there's other examples of effectively trying to secure identity cryptographically on the blockchain in an open way, and then using that identity in the future to differentiate between AI-driven agents and people. Do you think that's going to be important, or does that stuff not really matter in terms of the identity portion of not only crypto, but just like how we think about the future of agents?
The honest answer is I think we're going to go through a many-year period of extreme discomfort where AIs pretend to be things or confuse people or extract money from your grandparents or drain people's life savings in ways that are scary. And OpenAI is trying to do their best, but for some reason the focus has been on OpenAI doing everything, and instead of we should go build the systems that prevent that. We should go pass the legislation that drops the hammer on people doing that stuff. We should go all this kind of stuff that is, unfortunately, it seems like we're going to need some really bad things to happen before we align correctly. Mm-hmm. I'm not really scared about AIs killing us, although I'm very grateful that there are people that are thinking about it. I'm more worried about bad people using new technology to hurt us.
Yeah, Ilya from Near has some really interesting thoughts on this because he was one of the main authors, or he was the last author on the Transformer paper before he started Near. Mm-hmm. And he's brought up these concepts of how do you stress test society relative to the coming wave of AI, which I think is an interesting concept.
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it. It's not as bad as it could be, right? If you think about it, most of the things that you want to spam are either have a spam blocker or are somewhat difficult to create an account on. Mm-hmm. So, doing a better job of sock puppet account filtering is going to be really important going forward. I like what Cloudflare is doing with their kind of fingerprinting instead of visual captchas, which are not good enough anymore. One thing that is kind of a saving grace here is that many of the things that you would want to do cost money. Mm-hmm. So calling everybody costs money.
Sure.
Texting everyone should be hopefully illegal soon, but also costs money. Maybe not enough money to prevent these things, but
probably not enough as agents can make money, right? And they can just look at the trade-offs of cost.
Yeah, it gets interesting. Yeah, for sure. The other nice thing there is that grandmas don't have crypto, right? They have bank accounts, and bank accounts can be traced. I guess I would say it's not, it's somewhere in the middle. It's imagine there's North Korea has been trying to do this to us for a long time, right? Now there's a North Korea that has more resources or is more distributed or whatever. It's, we have some mitigations. We need more. We need to be thinking about it a lot more.
Mm-hmm. How did you end up at GitHub, and how did you end up working on Copilot?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Let's see. So while I was working on MobileCoin, my dad's kidneys failed, and I tried to donate them and donate a kidney. And they found a lump in my chest as part of the scans they do. And I had to have most of my right lung removed in 2018. And so that was a big deal. And so it took some time. Healing, it's weird. Healing from internal injuries takes a lot longer than you think. Anyway, happy story is that I don't have cancer now for over 4 years. And my dad's kidneys he got a transplant also. So things are good. And so after, I don't know, I guess I was recovering for quite a while. And then I went and begged my friend for a job. I figured I should start working again. So I worked on some random stuff at first. I converted GitHub to using their own product to build GitHub, which was kind of fun. They weren't, So I think people still use Codespaces now to build GitHub, which is pretty cool. Then this kind of opportunity to work with OpenAI came up, and because I had been tracking AI in the past and was pretty aware of what was going on, I jumped on it.
Was that proposed by OpenAI or by GitHub, or who kind of initiated it all?
So I don't know the exact gettings. I know that OpenAI and Microsoft were working on a deal for supercomputers. So they wanted to build a big cluster for training, and there was a big deal that was being worked out. And there was some software kind of provisions thrown in, I think Office and Bing probably. And GitHub was like, oh, well, okay, well, maybe we can, maybe there's something GitHub can do here. I think OpenAI threw a small fine tune over it and was like, here's a small model trained on some code. See if this is interesting, So we played around with it, and
what's small?
I don't know. This was I have to remember now. I think this is before I knew very much. So it was definitely not a Da Vinci size model. That's for sure. I don't know what size it was. Probably. Yeah, I don't know what size it was. Probably less than 10, but I can't remember. I learned later that this was basically a training artifact. So they had wanted to see what introducing code into their base models would do. I think it had positive effects on chain of thought reasoning. Code is kind of linear, so you can imagine that you kind of do stuff one after another, and the things before have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was not that good. It was very bad. It was, I think, just like I said, just an artifact and just a small sample of GitHub data that they had crawled. And we played around with it. This was before actually I joined. I was sort of me and this guy Albert Ziegler were the first two after Uge, who Uge got a hold of this model and started playing with it. He was able to say, like, well, it doesn't work most of the time, but here it is doing something. Here's and it was only Python at that time. Here it is, generating something useful. We didn't really understand anything. It's just sort of lobbed over at us. So that was enough to okay, well, go fetch a couple of people and start working, see if there's anything there. We didn't really know what we had, so the first task was to go test it out, see what it did. So we crowdsourced a bunch of Python problems in-house, stuff that we knew wouldn't be in the training set, and then we started work on fetching repositories and finding the tests in them, so that we could basically generate functions that were being tested and see if the tests still pass. There had been a brand new PyTest feature introduced recently that allowed you to see which functions were called by the PyTest. So you go find that function, zero its body, ask the model to generate it, and then rerun the test and see if it passed. And I think it was less, 10%, something like that of those guys. And the dimensions are kind of how many chances do you give it? How many chances do you give it to solve something? And then how do you test whether it's worked or not, right? So for the standalone tests, that was, we had people write test functions, and then we would try to generate the body. And if the test passed, then it works. And for in the wild test harness, we would download a repository, run all the tests, look at the ones that passed, find the functions that they called, make sure that they weren't trivial, generate the bodies for them, rerun the test, see what it passes, and you get your percentage. And it was something like some very, very low percentage up front, but we knew that there was kind of a lot more juice to squeeze. So getting all of GitHub's code into the model, and then a bunch of other tricks that we hadn't even thought of at that time. And eventually, it went from less than 10% in the wild test to over 60%. So that's 1 and 2 tests it can just generate code for, which is insane, right? Somewhere along the way, there was 10% to 20% to 35% to 45%. These kind of improvements along the way. Somewhere along the way, we did more prompting work so that the prompts got better. Somewhere along the way, they used all the versions of the code as opposed to just the most recent version. They used diffs so that it could understand small changes. It got better. And so, but when we first started, we didn't know what we had. We were just trying to figure it out. And at the time, they were thinking in terms of maybe you can replace Stack Overflow or something. Do a Stack Overflow competitor.
Was that the first product idea
I think
you guys had for it?
I don't know that we had that idea. I think that was kind of
the on high idea.
Yeah. That was more it'd be nice, if you could make something that competed with Stack Overflow, because we have all this code. Wouldn't it be nice to leverage it? And so we made some UIs, but early on, it was early on it was bad. So it would be you'd watch it and it would run, and most of them would be bad. And there'd be one success, and be oh, sweet, I got a success, but I had to wait, some number of seconds for
Was
a
the
success.
test user group just 6 of you, like some larger group?
We made a little, yeah. The first iteration was just like an internal tool that that helped people write these tests. And then we wanted to see if maybe we could turn that into some UI that people would use, where if there was some way to cover up the fact that 1 in 10 things pass, right? So we've tried a few UI things there. And then it was actually OpenAI. It was like, it would be nice if we're testing these model fine tunes. It'd be nice if we could like test them more quickly. What about doing like a VS Code extension? Just do autocomplete. So we did autocomplete at first, and that was a big jump, because they were still thinking in terms of like Stack Overflow, but it's like, I didn't have any ideas basically. I didn't know how to beat Stack Overflow with this thing, but we could play with some stuff in VS Code that was maybe closer to the code, and so we tried, first we did autocomplete, and that was kind of fun. It was useful, it would show this little pop-up box like autocomplete does, and you could pick some strings. And so that format actually, the usage was, was fine. It wasn't the right metaphor exactly, right? But you've got like this code generated mixed in with the specific terms that are in the code, and it's not exactly the same thing. We tried things like adding a little button over top of empty functions, so it would go generate them, or you could like hit a control key and it would create a big list on the side that you can choose from, or there's a little pop-up thing. So basically tried every single UI we could think of in VS Code.
And multiple generations, like the list, that didn't work.
Yeah, none of them like really worked. Like I think lists were like, maybe you'd get 1 generation per person per day. And this was just a small sample. It was just like a few people that were interested in at GitHub, language nerds, or people that had written tests for us, and OpenAI people. So then, I had very early on, I had this idea that it should work like a Gmail gray text autocomplete, which I was like enamored with that product. It's like, it was the first large language, quote unquote, large language model deployment in the wild. It was fast. It was cool. Like the paper's great. Like they give you all sorts of details on how they do it, all the workarounds they had to do. So that was always in the back of my head, and it was bad. Also, it was like, those completions are not good. But it seemed like the right thing. Anyway, and somewhere along the way after we tried all the UI, sort of come up with some idea for VS Code didn't support this. So I tried to hack it in and finally came up with a way to hack it in, and enough to make a demo, like a little demo video. And
was there support to like build real support for it within the organization?
It's a little complicated. I guess, we were pretty much a skunkworks project, so no one really knew, no one knew about us. So we would go to if we go to VS Code people and be like, hey, we need you to go implement this very complex feature. We're like, I don't even know who you are. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah, there was definitely some politicking that happened to get the VS Code people to dedicate some resources to that on a short time frame. Like we were moving really fast. It was less than a year before from beginning to ship public launch.
Was there a certain metric where you were like, this is good enough? Like we need to actually put it in the public product?
Yeah, there was. I mean, we had a nice long window of public access before GA, so where it was free and you could use it, and we did a bunch of optimizing for different groups of people that would be, okay, well, do we want more experienced people? Do we want more new people? We want people from this area or this area, and that gave us a bunch of really good stats. So we were able to learn that, for instance, like speed is the only thing that matters. Yeah, there's something crazy thing. Like every 10 milliseconds is 1% fewer completions that people would do. That adds up. 10 milliseconds is pretty fast. We learned that because somewhere in our first few months of public release, we noticed that Indian completions were really low. Like for whatever reason, they were just significantly lower than Europe.
So network latency to India?
Yeah. And it turns out, because OpenAI only had one data center, so it was all in Texas. And so it was going if you can imagine, you're like typing. And so that goes from India through Europe, over the water, down to Texas and back and back and back. And now if you've typed something that doesn't match the thing that you requested, then that's useless, right? So you don't get a completion.
But by the way, that I know it's obvious, but that's happened on every single product I've ever worked on. Like when I was at Google, I worked on a variety of mobile products, same thing, page load times, obviously search in general, 100 millisecond difference,
it's a big deal.
Makes a big shift in market share. So yeah, it's kind of nuts how much speed matters.
Yeah. And so once we figured that out, then we were able to, we knew that maybe this is too far ahead, but we knew that we had something awesome, right? Like people that were close to Texas were like, this is freaking great. Like they were like, we had a Slack channel and people were posting in it all the time. And the most fun stuff was like these people that would pop up and be like, I don't program, but I just like learned how to write this 100 line script that like does this thing that I need. It's like, oh my God.
I definitely feel like I now speak different languages that I don't actually know the syntax of, which is very exciting.
Yeah, it turns out these models are really great at finding patterns. So like after we figured out that, once we knew that, once we had the UI mechanism that worked, which was this like gray text, you hit tab, it inserts. And once we knew, and then also like a bunch of work to get the multi-line working, because we knew that the problem with the autocomplete was that it's only one line. You get this one line to like tell people what you wanted, but we knew the model could do more than that. It could do, a few, 10 lines realistically. Now it can do way more, and so we needed something that would show that off. And so we tried this ghost text thing, and it would just, the key insight was realizing that programmers kind of think in blocks. So if you can just autocomplete the rest of the current block, then that's what people want. They're kind of like judging what this block is going to do. And if it does the right thing, they know quickly. So if you can complete an if statement and it does the right thing, then it's easy to judge. So we knew we were on something like that. And then it was just this squeezing as much performance as we could get out. We basically never found the bottom of we made it as fast as we could, and it was still improving on completions. But so that was and then that perpetuated okay. I know there's this plan for Azure to run OpenAI in 6 months. We need you to do that in the next month. So let's figure out how to make this happen. So because we wanted to run a bunch of GPUs in Europe, so we could hit Asia. There was no other place that we could run them in Europe. We could run them on West Coast. We could run them in Texas at the time. So that was, and Microsoft stepped up there. We got it running. And then pretty much after that we launched. And
were you surprised by the uptake post-launch?
No. Yeah. No, I mean, our retention rate was 50%. It never went, months later, it was still above 50% by weekly cohort, which is insane.
Yeah.
Right. And we didn't know if people would pay for it. That was one thing. I lobbied pretty hard for going cheap and capturing the market.
How did you guys think about inference cost for this thing at the beginning?
Oh yeah, our estimates were wildly off. Yeah. So we got estimates that were it'll be $30 a month for your on average, right? And then we were able to once Microsoft was able to do their Azure infrastructure, we were able to then fork off little bits so we could do more accurate projections. And there was a bunch of moments where how much is it going to cost? You'd wait for these results, and the first big one was $10 a month. It'll cost $10 a month. And I was like, oh my God, it's so much cheaper than we expected. And then we could optimize it. And that was we hadn't even optimized on price yet, right? And then we optimized on price a bunch, and now it's less than that. So it was very fortuitous, right? We were thinking okay, well maybe it's enterprise only because that's the only people who are going to be willing to pay for this. $30 a month is not. It's a lot, and that's with no margins, right? But
so for 40% of your code, it's not a lot.
Yeah, that's the thing. We know that now. And not only that, it's the crazy thing is there's there's some whales out there. Like there's people who it writes 80% of their code, which is insane.
Where do you extrapolate all this, like 3 to 5 years out? Are there basically going to be just like agents writing code for us in certain ways? Is it 95% of code is written by copilots and, humans are kind of directing it? Like, what do you kind of view the world evolving into in the next couple of years? And next couple, I mean like 3 to 5, not 20.
Yeah, it's hard. I don't know. I think it's hard for me to, it's hard for me to imagine what that world looks like, because it's such a shift from like, I have my hands on something and I know that it's right, to where we are now, which is I mostly know it's right, or I have a sense that it's right, but I have to test it and see it run to know that it's right, to then just write this and I'll trust that it's going to work. Like those are pretty crazy transitions, right? They exist, like
sure. But you could also imagine like certain ways to do like a code review post, some chunk or some other sort of quality check to.
Yeah, I think if that's the goal we want to get to as a people, like I think every barrier to that is achievable. Mm-hmm. So we can code review only the dangerous parts, or only the scary or the confusing parts, or we could do things like train a model on functions before and after changes to say like, okay, this looks like a more polished version of this function would be this, or we can do things like, just start at the very basic main loop and then add everything piece by piece with tests so that it's, what works and what doesn't, and then just have the AI keep generating what's the logical next feature. Like, all these things will get figured out. So if that's what we want to do, that's what's going to happen.
So what's the idea behind Minion?
Yeah, I think I mentioned making bots that do stuff for you. It's a broad topic, and I think that's where we see going. The next few years are in the AI is taking action, not just answering questions or writing copy, but actually helping us in our daily lives. Things like organizing my schedule, or booking flights, or finding a trip for me to take, or doing my taxes, or telling me which contacts I haven't talked to in a long time and should reach out to. There's a lot of stuff that we can do by giving AIs access to information and letting them act on that information in a controlled way that checks to make sure that we're aligned. And I think that'll be a really fun future. I think, almost like you can imagine Copilot applied to everyday activities, right? Like Copilot gives you a little bit of help. So I want Minion to give you a little bit of help outside of your code editor.
How did you decide to work on Minion specifically?
Minion specifically. So basically, I stopped working at Magic. I quit because I couldn't figure out how to hook up the AI to data. I was like, in order to improve the quality, I need a PhD in math. Like, I don't know what to do now. And it just sort of, the models got better enough where that specific problem seems solvable. Yeah, so the tech got better. And so that specific problem is where interacting with the real world broke down in the past. Like I said, flights get delayed, prices change, not just like a little bit, all the time. They might not have the seat you want at the concert that you want to go to, and so AIs are this kind of compression of everything that you in their training set, but they're not a real time mechanism yet. Anyway, so that was the idea. I was like, okay, well, I think we can work on this old problem of how to make a bot do stuff for people. Like, that's what we want. Let's go make it. I don't know. It's like, maybe I can use the excitement from Copilot to launch into something which is incredibly hard, but which I believe the technology is around for, if we can figure it out. So that's it. That's the only reason I ever got into startups, actually, is like, okay, I want to do a startup so that I can do a harder startup.
Yeah.
Or I want to do a project so I can do a harder project.
Is this one sufficiently hard?
This one's hard. Yeah, it's good and hard. There are these fun things you kind of learn along the way that keep you like engaged, right? Like the thing with code with Copilot is like, it turns out code is pretty special, right? Like you can run it. So if an AI generates some code and it runs, then you know something about that code that you wouldn't know necessarily with text. And accomplish like doing agent-like work on the internet or on apps has a lot of these similar kind of properties where it's like, oh yeah, you can learn something here. We can learn from what people do, or we can see if it's a success or a failure, and then learn from that. Or we can optimize what works based on what doesn't work, or what figure out what's annoying and try to improve it. So I think these things all compound in some really interesting way. The goal, right, is straight out of sci-fi, right? You want to make a thing where you say, "Hey, computer, file my taxes," and it does the right thing. I think we can get there. It's certainly in the next few years. But it's also fun to like think about how to break these things down, and it turns out breaking down tasks in the same way that humans do. Take a complex task, you figure out, you write a list of things to go through it. Same kind of thing works for AIs as well. So you break down complex tasks, figure out if there's any information you need. Maybe you have to write some code. Maybe you have to ask some questions. Maybe you have to query some data. Same thing a human do. Humans don't usually write code to do their taxes, but sometimes it's kind of the same thing. You go through a list of your pay stubs. That's executing a for loop. Also, I like data sets that don't exist. So people clicking on stuff on the web is a gigantic data set, which is currently unowned. And so I think that's pretty exciting. I think there's a lot of stuff to learn from that.
So you're hiring. And one thing we've talked about is like, it's kind of a funny thing to try to hire for building products with this new set of technologies, and that like working in machine learning for the last decade may not help you that much. How do you think about the people you need?
Yeah, it's been strange. It's been odd actually. One thing, I don't know if other people have noticed this, but it seems very bimodal. Like very senior people get it, and very young people get it. And so I don't know that the middle has really caught up yet, or realizes that.
Are we on the other side? Are we in the middle?
No, I just mean the middle in terms of like. Yeah, no, I just mean the middle in terms of like. It's like.
I'm very young.
It's like super. No, it's not an age thing. It's not an age thing. It's more like there's like. It's
kind of like an experiential midwit curve. The midwit IQ thing.
Sure.
It's kind of like that for experience.
A little bit, yeah. It's almost like it's like you tell someone who's very naive and you tell someone who's very experienced, like, I can make magic. Here's how I can do it. And then the very naive person is like, that's awesome. And then the very experienced person is like, maybe. Yeah. But the response from almost everybody else is that's not possible, or I don't see it.
A number of companies I know are trying to build that intuition internally now. And often, this is the first time in a really long time that I've seen certain founders come back and start coding again. They'll have a multi-100-person company and they'll get so enamored by what's happening that they'll just dive in. And it's almost, a number of them have told me that they feel like some of their team members just don't have that intuition for what this can actually do. And so they don't even know what to build or where to start or how interesting or important it is. And so it's almost like this founder mindset is needed, to your point, in terms of this is a really interesting new set of capabilities and how to actually learn what these are and then how do I apply them. And I think people lack natural intuition for what this does right now.
It's definitely not intuitive. Yeah. I mean, I would say I have some intuition now, and people that are, again, on that experience spectrum have some intuition. But it's not intuitive. It's there's many kinds of different learners and there's many kinds of different programmers, right? It takes a certain kind of programmer to be comfortable with this idea of like, I don't know what's going to work. Let me try some stuff. It turns out that's similar attributes to the web or product making. being able to test stuff, look at the right metrics, find the right metrics. Those are useful skills, I think, that are reusable. But the intuition and the tenacity that it takes to like, this doesn't work at all. What do I do? That's still rare, I think, in that field, because there's so much uncertainty that it's easy to go like, I tried 10 things and it didn't work, so like this is impossible. Like, okay.
Or I think the natural reaction of somebody looking at something that has 10% performance at the beginning is like, why even bother? We're not going to get there, right?
Yeah. The crazy thing is that these things work at all, right? And not only that, but they scale and they improve with scale, right? Most things break at scale. Almost everything breaks at scale, and that's what you hire people to deal with. Every doubling, usually something breaks, you got to fix it. It's a pretty crazy thing to think of what kind of emergent properties might still be out there. If we can get these things 10 times bigger. So I'm always in favor of people pushing those limits. Like it doesn't make sense. Like even the best people can't explain what's going to happen when you go bigger. But like we built the Large Hadron Collider for that reason too. We think maybe we'll find some stuff. These endeavors are valuable, and I'm grateful to be alive during this time for sure.
It's a great note to end on. Thank you for joining us for the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so
Alex.
much.
Sure.